Greg and his 5-year-old son, Troy, decided to spend a sunny afternoon at the village playground. The playground was lively, filled with the laughter and shouts of children playing on the swings, slides, and seesaws. Troy spotted his friend, Max, among the children and got excited. As soon as Greg parked the car, Troy jumped out and ran towards the playground, eager to join his friend. Greg watched his son run off with a smile. It was good to see Troy so happy and full of energy. After an hour of play, most of the children had already left, and the playground grew quieter. Greg called Troy over and told him they would leave in 15 minutes. Troy nodded and went back to playing, while Greg sat on a bench, scrolling through his phone. The 15 minutes flew by, and it was time to go. Greg stood up, put his phone away, and looked around for Troy. He saw him heading into the tunnel slide. Greg called out to him, "Troy, it's time to go. Come on out." Greg waited at the end of the tunnel, expecting Troy to come out any second. But minutes passed, and there was no sign of his son. Growing impatient, Greg crouched down and peeked inside the tunnel. To his surprise, he saw Troy sitting in the middle of the tunnel, facing away from him. "Troy, come on. We need to go home," Greg said, reaching out to him. As his hand was about to touch Troy's shoulder, the boy turned to face him. Greg's heart skipped a beat. The child staring back at him had shallow eyes and very white skin. It wasn't Troy. Greg recoiled in shock and stumbled back. "Where's my son?" he muttered, panic rising in his chest. He frantically searched the playground, calling out Troy's name. The sun was setting, casting eerie shadows over the empty playground. 15 minutes passed, and Greg still couldn't find Troy. His worry turned to fear. Suddenly, the swing set started moving on its own, the empty swings swaying back and forth. The seesaw began to creak as it moved up and down without anyone on it. Greg felt a chill run down his spine. The playground, once a place of joy, now felt ominous and haunted. 30 agonizing minutes later, Greg saw Troy emerge from the tunnel. Relief washed over him, and he ran to his son, scooping him up in his arms. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Troy looked at his father, his eyes wide with innocence. "I was playing with the white boy in the tunnel," he said. Greg's blood ran cold. "What white boy, Troy?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "The white boy with the funny eyes. He wanted to play hide and seek," Troy replied. Greg felt a mixture of fear and relief. He was glad to have his son back, but the thought of the strange boy in the tunnel terrified him. Without another word, he grabbed Troy's hand and hurried to the car. They drove home in silence, the events of the evening replaying in Greg's mind. That night, as Greg tucked Troy into bed, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him. He decided they would never go back to that playground again. The next morning, he told his wife what had happened. She listened, her face growing pale with each word. From that day on, they avoided the playground. Greg couldn't explain what he had seen, but he knew it was something unnatural, something that had no place in their world. And every time they drove past the playground, Greg felt a shiver run down his spine, remembering the terror of that evening and the strange boy with the shallow eyes. When I was 10 years old, we lived in a nice, peaceful neighborhood with lots of kids my age to play with. There was an old playground nearby with a swing set, monkey bars, short slides, a seesaw, and roundabouts. We often played there, and it became our hangout spot. However, we never went there at night. One day, it was our friend Amy's birthday, so we went to her house for a party. Amy's house was just a few blocks away from the playground. The party was fun with games, cake, and lots of laughter. Around 7 p.m., the party ended, and Jake and I walked home together. On our way, we passed by the playground and decided to hang out there for a while since it was still early. It was a windy night, and the air was cooler than usual. The trees rustled softly, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the ground. Jake and I got on the swings and started gently pumping our legs back and forth. We talked about the party, laughing about the funny moments. Then, Jake had an idea. We should see who could swing higher. So we began pumping our legs harder. When we reached the highest point of the swing, we tucked our legs in as we swung back. Jake swung really high, and we laughed at each other, feeling the rush of the cool wind against our faces. Suddenly, Jake said he was tired and suggested we head home. But just then, I saw in horror that Jake was swinging back and forth even higher, crying and screaming. I didn't know what to do, so I panicked and started screaming too. I told him to hold on tightly, but then Jake let go and fell off the swing. I rushed to him and asked if he was hurt. He said he was okay, though he looked shaken. But then we heard a strange noise. We looked over and saw the roundabout slowly spinning on its own. It spun faster and faster, even though no one was on it. The creaking sound of the metal was eerie, and it sent chills down my spine. We stood there, frozen in fear, watching the roundabout move faster and faster. The wind seemed to howl louder, and the shadows around us grew darker and more menacing. I helped Jake stand up, and we decided it was time to get out of there. We ran like crazy all the way home, our hearts pounding in our chests. When we finally reached home, we were out of breath and terrified. We didn't tell anyone about what happened at the playground, but ever since that night, we never went back there again. The playground, once a place of fun and laughter, had become a place of fear and mystery for us. Every time we walked past it during the day, we couldn't help but feel a shiver run down our spines, remembering that terrifying night.